Welcome to the conversation. My name is Cariann, and I will be your host in this first segment. Yes, this is the first segment. I know it looks like the second, but stay with us. I am actually joined today by Benjamin, our supermodel, is what it says here, as well as Mike, our rocket specialist. I'm just simply reading what is on the prompter. We also have a Dutta, who's actually in the other room, who will be producing the show. Thank you, Dutta. Today in news we have...
Space Launch System, surprise, surprise, maybe slipping to 2020.
And we got to talk about XCOR Aerospace and how they have filed for bankruptcy.
So sad. This better not be a depressisode, you guys. I'm not.
No, it's good. It's good. I promise it'll be good. It'll be good.
Okay.
It'll be good.
All right. We're gonna do a little bit of a roundtable discussion. In case you can't tell, I'll keep that little bit a secret, and then we will get to your questions and comments about not last week's show, but about our last show. This is Orbit 10.44.
Good morning. How's everything up in the sky?
All right, so before we get into our first segment, which of course is news, I want to make sure that we give a huge thank you to our patrons. These are the Escape Velocity variety. These people have given us $10 or more for this particular segment of this particular episode. I told you I could do a good impression of you, Ben. And they get their name in all three segments of the show, access to our exclusive Patreon-only hangouts, which we need to do for sure, read-only access to the TMRO host channel, which is lots of fun, and so many other things. If you are interested in any of these things or anything else like that, head on over to patreon.com/TMRO. Oh my goodness. We missed you guys.
Oh yeah.
We missed you. You didn't have to miss us, but we definitely missed you. We missed just talking with each other actually and talking with you guys. So as we always like to do, I want to make sure that we do launches right up front.
Hang on before you do. This is like an old school like space vidcast show almost, right? It's just you, me, and Mike,
almost.
Right? We're going back.
Yeah, and
all the feels,
and Dutta,
blah blah blah,
and in the studio,
blah blah.
Okay.
Yeah, but from a people standpoint.
Yeah, from a people standpoint,
the
nobody
three that matter in Dutta
cares about. Yeah.
I've got words.
But don't worry, everybody. Jared will be back next week.
Yes, Jared will be back next week.
So anyway.
Yeah.
I derailed you. I'm sorry. Launches,
you totally did. Very classic. Not my fault this time. Anyway, launches, Mike. Goodness, what do we have going on in the last 2 weeks? We've been off air, so I know we've launched at least something, right?
So since our last show, there started off with the 2 Chinese launches, the first of which was a Long March 6 rocket launch. And the Long March 6 is a little bit interesting because it uses liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen, and it's based off of the side-mounted boosters for the Long March 5. And this is actually the second flight of the Long March 6 rocket ever. Now, this particular flight happened on Tuesday, November 21st at 4:50 Coordinated Universal Time. And this one happened from the Taiyuan Space Center in northeast China. Now, the payloads for this mission were 3 Jilin Earth imaging satellites named Jilin 1-04, 5, and 6. And these are owned and operated by a commercial company that is going to be having 60 satellites in orbit by 2020 to provide commercial Earth imaging data in real time. So that was a successful launch. And really interestingly, the next launch that China happened to launch also was launching 3 Earth imaging satellites. But this time it was for the Chinese military. So technically they were spy satellites. This time, though, they were launching on the Long March 2C rocket, which is using the old type of fuels, the more hypergolic toxic fuels. And this particular launch happened on Friday, November 24th at 1810 Coordinated Universal Time from the Xicheng Space Center in southwest China. Now, for this, the two-stage Long March 2C rocket that launched these, it deployed 3 Yaogan 30 spacecraft, the military Earth imaging satellites. And officially, they have electromagnetic observations, but they have been launching several of these. And there was an identical launch to this one in September of this year, using the Long March 2C, launching 3 Yaogan satellites. And we're going to see another one like this early next year as well. So, congratulations to China for both of these successful launches. And I'm happy to see them catching up a little bit for this year, since in the previous years they've been doing most of the launches for the entire world. But we need to talk about the next launch as well, which was a Russian launch. And unfortunately, this one didn't go so well. This one was a Soyuz launch. It was a Soyuz 2-1B rocket launch that was using a Fregat upper stage. And this was launching a Russian weather satellite and also 18 other commercial satellites with it as well. So this one happened from the Vostochny Cosmodrome, which is in eastern Russia. And it happened this week on Tuesday, November 28th at 5:41 Coordinated Universal Time. Now, as I said, the primary payload was a Russian weather satellite called Meteor M2-1. It's the third in a series of upgraded Meteor M weather satellites, and this is the first one that actually was supposed to be equipped with an emergency distress beacons and be able to pick up emergency signals and broadcast them through the Emergency International Network. But also on board this flight were several a test communication spacecraft for Telesat, 10 CubeSats for Spire Global, 2 commercial land mapper CubeSats for Astro Digital, formerly Aquila Space. There was 2 European and 1 university CubeSat on board, a Norwegian ship tracking microsat, and a Japanese orbital debris tracking nanosat. And the first 3 stages of the Soyuz rocket for the launch performed as expected. However, the Fregat upper stage did not execute the 7 planned engine burns over a 4-hour flight to place those payloads into their separate orbits. Now, no official statement from Roscosmos has been made about why this failure occurred, and there's still an ongoing investigation. However, they have cleared several future Soyuz flights that at least don't have the Fregat upper stage for launch. And there's been several rumors going around, and there is at least one theory. Anatoly Zak from Russian SpaceWeb has said that there is an inside source that says that this could have been caused by human error, and that simply the flight computer on the Fregat upper stage was programmed not for a launch from the Vostochny Cosmodrome in eastern Russia, but either from the Baikonur Cosmodrome or from the Plesetsk Cosmodrome. And so once the Fregat stage took over the flight, its computer thought it was in the completely wrong place, completely wrong trajectory, and completely wrong inclination. And so adjusted itself to do a correction burn and thus didn't even get into orbit in the trajectory that it was already in. Or at least that's a theory anyway. As I said, there have been no official statements as to why this failure occurred. But something that's a little bit unusual about this, at least to me, is that usually whenever there's a failure like this, the whole fleet of that particular rocket is grounded until an investigation is complete. And it seems like everything's fine with Soyuzes that aren't using the Fregat upper stage, because we had another launch just today, early this morning, that was also a Soyuz. So apparently things are fine for that, and we'll just have to wait and see if there is any official statements about the Fregat stage and why this particular launch failed. And thankfully, all of those satellites were covered by insurance, though. But let's go ahead and move right along to the launch that occurred this morning. And despite this previous failure that happened earlier this week, just early this morning, the Russian Ministry of Defense launched a Soyuz 2-1B, the same type of rocket, from the Plesetsk Cosmodrome, and this happened early this morning at 10:43 Coordinated Universal Time. Now, due to this being a military launch, there isn't a whole lot of footage, but at least we get to see the initial takeoff anyway. Now, officially, the payload for this mission is called Lotos. It's the second in a series of new electronic signals intelligence satellites, or ELINT satellites, that Russia is deploying as part of their Liana program, which aims to modernize their intelligence gathering capabilities. And it was a successful launch, and the satellite has been designated Cosmos 2524. So this was a successful launch for them, and it did not have any type of special upper stage, just the normal three-stage Soyuz. So congratulations to Russia for that successful launch, at least, and hopefully everything gets figured out with the Fregat upper stages very soon. And that was the launches since we've been off the air for 2 weeks.
Hey, Spacebank, before we move on to news, a quick question. It seems like over the last few years, Russia's had more and more failures than they've ever had, like in their history. Are you seeing the same thing? Is there any reason for that? I mean, what's going on over there?
I mean, that's a whole nother can of worms that we could get into. I mean, they've been pretty much having at least one, or at least, a partial failure every year since 2003, every year. So pretty much, at least official statements that you can see this, is that it's all quality control. And, the engineers aren't paid very well, and a lot of their workforce is, aging and retiring, and there isn't a whole lot of incentive to, new students in Russia to work in the space industry in Russia. And so they've been trying to reorganize it. I mean, they reorganized all of the different companies and all the different design bureaus and Roscosmos itself into a federal corporation. So it's kind of scary the way that they've organized it. It kind of is a callback to some of the Soviet communist days, but it's a way of trying to modernize the way that they do business with all of these different companies and hopefully be able to pay people more, although they keep having strikes, in a lot of the different spaceports that they've been trying to build things up. And they just, with all these different failures, sometimes with some of these failures, they do a really transparent investigation and figure out the problem and correct it. And other times it just kind of is whatever. And especially whenever it's a human error like this, there, is always kind of weird things about it. And, I believe he's the Deputy Prime Minister of Defense, Dmitry Rogozin. His entire job was to revamp and to figure out what the systemic problem is within Roscosmos and all the different design bureaus and manufacturing plants as to why they keep having at least one or at least a partial failure every year since 2003. So there is a lot of problems, and there's a lot that we don't know that's going on behind the scenes, and we'll probably never know. And, they just need to be they're trying to really adopt the kind of Silicon Valley type model and try somehow to have some sort of incentive to have a new workforce coming in so that they can continue to be, one of the leaders in space. And, we all can agree that, Russian rocket engines are the best in the world, undeniably. So it would be a real shame to see a lot of their stuff go away. Yes, it is unchanged, but they've been making improvements. It's not like they're flying the same Soyuz rocket that they originally came out with in the 50s. They've been making improvements steadily over the years and getting as much efficiency as they can out of it. But at the same time, I would be heartbroken to see the Soyuz and Proton never launch again just simply because they can't do it anymore. Even though it's the same thing, that would be such a shame if they just couldn't do it anymore. Anyway, I could rant for a little while longer.
No, good. I think that's a good analysis. Yeah, all right, awesome.
I mean, the other way to look at that is China has a tendency that if they fail, they just don't talk about it, and so you just don't hear it.
Yeah, I mean,
right?
it's really hard to not notice those things in space, though, right?
But
so China may not mention it, but we're going to see it, right? It's still going to be brought up, but you cannot hide these things. Some of them
anymore.
You used to be able to. Back
there was
in the
that
day.
Long March 5 failure earlier this year, and I haven't heard anything about it, but we all knew that happened.
Right.
So.
All right. Yeah. So, in other depressing news,
it's not depressing.
It's a little depressing.
It's not depressing.
You just want to win the bet. It's fine.
Well, no, actually, all right. So here's the deal. Here's the news story, which is the title of the story is the Space Launch System's not launching until 2020, June 2020. But that's not actually officially official. Right now, the managers have set a best case launch date for December 2019. So that's still kind of the date that's floating around, but. They're looking at where they're at right now and like all the engineering challenges they're expecting along the way from manufacturing a brand new rocket, which is what this is. And they're like, yeah, no, it's going to be 2020. But just to show that this thing is actually going to launch, because we talk about the Space Launch System a lot and how it's very expensive and it's behind schedule. But I don't think we've actually gone to the trouble, and we really should have, of showing you pictures that there is bent metal on this thing. This is a real rocket being built. So Dudley, just go ahead and just kind of randomly. So that's a liquid hydrogen tank, I believe, the LH2 tank. And we've got just a bunch of pictures to show that it is being built. It's not like this is a paper rocket anymore. This is a real thing. But as I mentioned, we're looking, most likely we're looking into June 2020 at the earliest launch date. And that's because engineers do expect more delays over the next couple of years as they're assembling and testing a brand new rocket. Some causes for these delays: they had a missed delivery date for the European-made service module, snags in the welding of parts to the SLS core due to low yield strength. Now, to be fair, this is some of the thickest metal that is friction stir welded on anything. So, problems with welding can be expected. There was a tornado that struck a production site in New Orleans. However, all major structural components of the core stage have completed fabrication. That's 5 basic pieces. That's the liquid oxygen tank, the liquid hydrogen tank, the aft engine section, the intertank section, and the forward skirt. So a good chunk of the main components there, you're looking at like avionics builds for the rocket. Look at all that cabling. That's just an incredible amount of cabling that's going up and down the rocket. So the next step is going to be outfitting the pieces with plumbing, that wiring that you see, the avionics, thermal protection, and 4 of the RS-25 main engines. And actually that is, I believe, where some of the main engine work is going to occur for like integration. And then the RS-25 engine is the space shuttle main engine. And here's a shot of them. That is, I don't believe, a real RS-25. I think that is a Pathfinder. A Pathfinder meaning it's kind of like the size and shape and general configuration of a real RS-25. Or it's an RS-25 that they're not going to use. I'm not sure, because that looks way more complete than a real Pathfinder.
I think it is a real one. They're just not going to actually use it. They're using it to do tests like this.
It doesn't, because Pathfinder's usually like wooden, anyhow, right. But they're using that to make sure they can lift up the engine safely, move it around safely, not break any components. Because these are things that you don't normally think are hard, but the rocket components, they can be fragile. They need to be moved in a certain way. We've got the engines on this rocket, the power plant, one of the hardest parts. We know that they work because, space shuttle main engines, some tweaking on it. We've got the liquid hydrogen, the liquid oxygen tanks, the skirts. We've got a good chunk of the avionics done. So now it's just kind of that integration section, and then figuring out some of those last components that need to all kind of go together for this block 1. Now, by the end of the current fiscal year, which will be September 30th, 2018, NASA will have spent $23 billion on the Space Launch System. 15 billion of that is coming since 2012, which means those figures are post-Constellation program. So the Space Launch program, because the Space Launch System is kind of a tweaked Ares 5, which was Constellation, so we're not including the Constellation price of that. That's a good chunk of money that goes into the Space Launch System. Yeah, it's a lot, but it's looking more real, right? There's metal there, there are engines there, there's avionics. It's coming together, very large structure.
What's the bet you have?
My bet is that it will launch. Yeah, okay.
Who's the bet with?
With Dave Maston.
Okay. You bet it will launch.
I believe the exact bet. Hang on. I believe the exact bet is it will commit its engines to fire. Okay. Now, what actually happened, like with intent to lift off the pad? Right. Now, whether it lifts off the pad or not, or disassembles,
has a rud or anything like that,
is irrelevant. It's just that it had intent to lift off the pad, and then I win the bet. Okay.
And what is he betting?
He's like, no, that will never happen.
Just checking.
Well, it's very expensive, and it's political. It's a political rocket.
What's the bet up to now?
Oh, I don't. So that's the other thing is I keep changing the parameters.
First it was a steak dinner or something.
No, first it was $1.
No, it wasn't even that. At first I think it was just a gentleman's bet. So I keep changing the parameters.
It was $1.
Oh, was it at first?
I thought it was $1.
Yes.
Okay, it may have been.
It was Orbit 6, episode like 5 or 7 or something like that. It was like when I just started doing TMRO.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
I think we were Space Vidcast in orbit.
Back in the
Yes.
apartment.
Yes.
Yeah. So all right. So it was a $1 bet with Dave Maston, and every time I bring up the bet, I make the reward something larger. I think the last time I brought it up, it was a steak dinner. So I'm not sure.
I think it's a ruby red
remember
Tesla
last.
Roadster now.
A ruby red Tesla Roadster. I don't know what to increase it to at this point.
Sure, Dave, you just got to go and get it.
Yeah. So and actually, as Davey's saying in the chat room, the Space Launch System will probably fly once, only if at all. My bet is still that it will be canceled once the SpaceX Big Falcon rocket and Blue Origin New Glenn start flying. Will end. But here's the thing to remember with the Space Launch System is it's not about, it's like in private companies, it's about, dollars, cents, building a business model. That is not what this is. That's not, the Space Launch System is fundamentally a jobs program. So I do not see it going away anytime soon because they don't want to get rid of those jobs in their districts.
It is also currently congressionally mandated.
Right. So
it is law.
Yeah, you can't just cancel it.
It's
NASA
not
can't cancel
going
it.
to go away until something as big replaces it in a jobs program sense.
Yeah, and then you got
Because
Block 1.
how many replacements did we have to shuttle before we even got to this point? Like 5? I'm not even sure anymore. But anyway, we're still in news,
Here's the
guys.
thing. Yeah, I know. But
It's Ben's fault. It's fine.
it's the end of the year. We're allowed to go off script here. I don't actually think so. The thing that drives me crazy with the Space Launch System is that it's designed not by engineers but by Congress. However, there is something to be said for a super heavy lift rocket. You can do pretty cool things. They need to find ways to bring the cost down, and I think NASA understands this. The NASA side of this equation is just fine. There's nothing wrong with the engineers or the NASA side. It's the politics side that I think we all have a gripe with. So get rid of the politics for a moment. This thing actually starts to fly. It can do some pretty cool things. It can do some pretty cool planetary science. And Block 1 is neat. I have a bit of a gripe with Block 1 because they build Block 1, and that's the only time they'll ever fly it. So like building SLS Mark 1 flies once, and then everything changes for block, what are we, it's Block 2, right? It's not 1.5, it's 2, right? So for the next block, everything changes. They even the launch tower has to change for Block 2. So all of the pad structure has to change.
Right.
Anyhow, so that's the one I'm most excited about is SLS Block 2, assuming we ever get there.
In case, because people are asking, Alex Physics in the chat room as well as Stand for Liberty off of YouTube, both are implying the same sort of thing. So what if you stop the SLS program, but then those jobs go into, say, SpaceX or Blue Origin, they become SpaceX or Blue Origin jobs or other private companies. The thing is, it doesn't quite translate in that way. Just because there are people who are out there who are very, very capable, it doesn't mean that those private companies can just absorb them. That's
or
just,
want to.
Yeah, or want to in some cases as well.
The needs of a government agency like that are diametrically opposed to the needs of a private agency, right? A private agency wants to keep their head count low because they don't want to pay for the people.
They're trying to stay lean and mean. They're trying to not be the government agency. So unless somebody is really, really exceptional in one particular area, the best and the brightest, I think some companies say that they only hire the top 10% or top 5% or whatever it is. If those smaller companies are looking for only 1 or 2 people, and then an entire government agency, program shuts down. And how many people did you say were on there, Mike, for the Space Launch System? Were you the one who quoted something along the lines of like 40,000 people or 80,000 people?
Those numbers don't seem right, though.
Sure, but whatever it is, it's definitely more than 1,000 people who are working on this program.
Certainly.
That if they suddenly didn't have a job wherever they are in the country, there aren't necessarily other companies that can just absorb them and would happily take them on and be able to pay them the same salary and the whole nine. And the idea, yes, ideally, sure, great, we don't want these people to be out of jobs. That's not what any of us are saying in any way, shape, or form. We just feel that
I don't think that they're going to be going anywhere either. I mean, that's
right.
the whole reason for a lot of this political support in the United States for NASA, still to this day, is because of those jobs. And that's the thing that all those congressmen and senators always bring up whenever NASA is talked about. So.
We've had this conversation before, and I'll end on, we can save those jobs and do really cool things. The role of NASA should not be to rebuild what we've already done before or what private industry can very easily do, which I think private industry is proving that they can do. I say very easily, but all rocketry is hard. What NASA should be doing and what they should be working on are the really far out there things. They're really hard to engineer things that private industry can't do. Like, they should be working on Mars habitats. They should be working on nuclear propulsion to Mars. They should be working on, like, because private industry is not doing that, right? They should be working on those insanely difficult things and put those engineers, because NASA has great engineering minds.
Absolutely.
And put them to use. I think the exception to this, I say NASA, but NASA is a bunch of different centers. I really mean the human spaceflight area, but you look at like JPL, they're doing wonders. Like, they get very little.
Oh, yeah. They get really little money.
Let JPL continue to do what JPL
do what
does.
they're doing.
Yeah, exactly. It's
Great.
kind of the human spaceflight side of it that's kind of mucking it up for everyone else. And it's not even, again, it's not even NASA's fault. Just let the human spaceflight side of it do advanced human spaceflight. SLS is not that. End
fair.
of rant. I'm sorry. This went way off track.
We did this
let's
all
move on. Let's move on.
the last show.
Yeah. Let's move on.
All right. So, Mike, how about you talk for a little bit? XCOR Aerospace
Still in news.
files for bankruptcy, as opposed to what we thought earlier was saying XCOR Aerospace flies for bankruptcy. Which is just a little bit confusing. I apologize for that. But, Mike, what's going on with XCOR Aerospace?
Yeah, so, I mean, some of you guys who watch the show have probably heard about this before, but I figured it was time we talked about it because a lot of the documents have come out about, how much money is owed and all that sort of thing. And just kind of as a refresher, XCOR Aerospace is famous for their Lynx space plane, and they were started in 1999 by a team of engineers who were involved in the rotary rocket project, and especially one of the founding members who led the company for a long time, Jeff Grayson. And XCOR operated out of Mojave, California, and initially created the first privately built rocket-powered plane, the XCOR Easy rocket, in 2001. And within a couple of years, XCOR eventually revealed their plans for this suborbital rocket-powered space plane. Now, the Lynx and XCOR have used, they've kind of served as the underdog competitor to Virgin Galactic and their Spaceship Two suborbital space plane. The main differences being that Lynx would travel under its own power without a carrier plane, and it would only carry 2 people at a time, a pilot and a passenger, as opposed to the 8 people at a time on Spaceship Two, using, 2 pilots and 6 passengers. And XCOR really kind of heavily leaned on science experiments. Science experiments, of course, would have been carried out during a flight on the Lynx spaceplane, and they focused a lot more on that with their marketing than they did the suborbital space tourism and the novelty of space tourism. But things started to change for XCOR back in 2012 when they received some seed money to move their facilities to Midland, Texas. Things seemed to be going really well for the company, and they were making a lot of progress and were physically building the first prototype of the Lynx spaceplane. But in mid-2015, 3 of the co-founders, including Jeff Grayson, Dan DeLong, and Aletta Jackson, left the company to found Agile Aero, which we have yet to hear much from. And one of their officers, Jay Gibson, took over as the CEO of XCOR Aerospace. And things seem to still be going really well for XCOR. XCOR even got a contract from United Launch Alliance for advanced upper stage rocket engines, possibly to be used on their Vulcan rocket and the Aces upper stage. But this contract may have eventually been their downfall, because by May of 2016, XCOR had halted all work on the Lynx spaceplane to focus on this engine contract. But eventually that contract fell through, and XCOR seemingly didn't really have any other prospects. And by June of this year, Jay Gibson had left the company and has since been appointed for a Pentagon job. And last month, at the beginning of November, XCOR filed for bankruptcy. The company has about $1.1 million in assets and about $1,400 in cash. And according to documents filed with the bankruptcy court for the Eastern District of California, XCOR owes $27 million to creditors, and about $23 million of that is unsecured debts, and almost $4 million of that is liability secured by assets. Now, most of that money is owed to the Midland Development Corporation. That what we're seeing on screen is the some of the facilities that they built in Midland, and seemingly didn't really get much use out of. They also owe money to Space Florida, who gave them seed money, also to a company called SXC, which is located on the island of Curacao, which they had a deal to do flights out of Curacao using the X spaceplane, and several other partners who marketed tickets for Lynx flights and potentially would have hosted flights for the Lynx spaceplane. They weren't just going to launch from the United States. But I guess we're never really going to know exactly what went on behind the scenes. But I do remember feeling like there was a reason for all of those co-founders to leave XCOR back in 2015, especially Jeff Grayson, because I felt like this was his dream. And anyone who's ever heard him speak knows what I'm talking about. And something else that's kind of gotten me down about this is Orbital Outfitters. You saw that spacesuit on screen just a second ago. Orbital Outfitters was kind of being the contractor for XCOR to build the spacesuits for those flights once they started happening. And in the bankruptcy documents, it says that they are out of business. So it's just like, dang, that sucks too. But what can we learn from this? Maybe one of the lessons here is to not necessarily put all of your eggs in one basket and to never really give up or get misdirected from your original goal. And it really sucks that this is happening, but I really hope that we see something cool come out of Agile Aerospace. At first, it kind of seemed like they were just going to do consulting, but maybe there will be some awesome, collaboration in the future. I really hope so, because I really enjoyed Jeff Grayson's speeches that he would give at a lot of different space conferences around the country. He was very, very passionate about this project. And I, for one, as I said earlier, they were like the underdog competitor to Virgin Galactic. So I really wanted to see this happen. So it's just kind of one of those things that, it sucks, but we need to talk about. And, hopefully the assets that they do have can, be sold and auctioned off. And maybe someone will even pick up the pieces from their project. And maybe we will see the Lynx fly someday in some other iteration or something like that.
Yeah, I remember the moment in time where I was like, uh-oh, that might be the end of XCOR.
Mm-hmm. When they moved from California to Texas.
When they moved from California to Texas, I went, ooh, that is not a good move. Because you do because it's really expensive here, but you got to stay in California because this is where the engineers are.
Yeah.
And most of them are not willing to move to Texas. And that is exactly what we saw.
Midland is also like middle of nowhere, Texas.
I'm not saying anything bad with Texas. I'm just saying that this is not the first time this has happened, and it's not the first company that this has happened to. You pick up and move from California to Texas. Good things tend to not happen.
And we have met Jeff on a number of occasions, and yeah, he is a lovely human being. Agile Aero also has a website, in case those of you are interested. It's agile.aero, AERO, on the interwebs, so you can go ahead and check that out. And yeah, it has a very Lynxy sort of look and feel to it for the pictures they have on their website.
As someone mentioned in the chat room, Stand for Liberty said, bankruptcy in business is not so much an end, it's more of a reorganization, although this does sound like the end for XCOR. It may not be, right? It may not be. I'm not dead yet.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
I do like the concept of the XCOR space plane, and I think there's some pretty cool stuff there. And they have some really cool engines, too. So here's hoping that
there's a lot of stuff that was really good about that company for sure. So here's hoping that they somehow either revamp or something. All right. So speaking of sort of the phoenix rising out of the fire.
Oh, okay. So I have some covering footage so I can read my notes, and it's from this is about Voyager 1 and its trajectory correction maneuvers it needs to do. Easy for me to say.
Yeah.
And I couldn't find any really great Voyager 1 footage, but from 1979 I found some Voyager 2 footage, and since they're twinsies, this is actual 1979 animation footage from NASA JPL.
This is amazing.
It's amazing. Here you go. Here's the footage. It's magical. What this is magical. And the reason we're talking about Voyager 1 is because for the first time in 37 years, it has fired its trajectory correction thrusters. And the last time they fired them was in November of 1980 during its last planetary flyby, which happened to be Saturn. Now, JPL engineers have brought the engines back to life because the attitude control thruster performance, which is what they normally use, has been grading over the last 3 years. So attitude controls need to keep Voyager 1's antennas kind of aligned with Earth's. Consider everything's kind of moving in the solar system, everything's moving away, so you need to kind of keep Voyager 1 pointed in the right direction. Attitude control thrusters is designed for really short bursts, really little, very, very tiny course corrections. However, the thrusters that they brought online, the trajectory correction thrusters, those are designed for very, very long burns, and so engineers weren't entirely sure if they would work. However, they did work. They worked extremely well, and because of that, the TCM will enter control service in January of 2018. They're hoping that this is going to extend the life of Voyager 1 spacecraft by 2 to 3 years. Each thruster requires a heater to operate, which in turn uses power. Voyager 1 is powered by an RTG, which is a radioisotope thermoelectric generator, so basically nuke. And when power gets too low, Voyager 1 is going to have to switch back to those attitude control thrusters, which have been slowly degrading over the last 3 years. So, as of August 2012, it became the first human-made object ever to enter interstellar space. And in the year 2150, it's expected to become Voyager, and should be returning back to Earth sometime around the year 2170 or so.
Wow.
Where it will be
Lame.
encountered. Well, actually, so technically, I believe in Star Trek it was Voyager 6, a future Voyager 6 mission, which isn't a thing, not Voyager 1. Yeah. Oh yeah. No, the Voyager notes are in my rundown.
Yeah, I saw them.
And my favorite fan theory too is that Voyager is actually the original source of the Borg too. So we started it all, guys.
Because in the movie they mentioned how it went to a planet of computers, which would kind of describe the Borg, right? So it came from like the Borg homeworld. Yeah, I like that one too. Yeah, we went off track. Anyhow, Voyager 1 still going strong. Engineers had to do some creative things to keep it pointed at Earth. Successfully worked. Congratulations to JPL and all the engineers who made it happen.
And how awesome it is that those thrusters that haven't been used in so long worked perfectly, and that they're going to be taking over for the primary attitude control. That's awesome.
Haven't been used in nearly 40 years, and they're
that
using,
is really cool.
Right,
I'm
haven't been used in 40 years, and they have to use them in a way they weren't designed to use. And apparently, I didn't mention this, but apparently
they have an old Commodore 64. Do they dug
That
up?
was the problem. They had to figure out it's done in an old school assembly language.
Yes.
And they were like, anyone know this?
Communicate
Can we
with
figure out how to make this go?
Oh man!
They have punch cards for that?
Wow.
Maybe.
Oh
maybe.
man! Why didn't they call your dad?
Maybe.
Where's Dad Dog?
Yeah, where's Dad Dog?
Maybe.
My dad still.
Oh man!
My dad still has some punch cards.
Yeah.
Sitting in a little
I'm
box.
aware.
Yep.
Man, that's funny. Okay. I think we've had enough news.
I thought that was great news.
I thought that was amazing.
Yeah.
Man. Okay, so what we're gonna do now is we're gonna take a little bit of a break, and when we come back, we are going to do a semicircle table,
A half round.
if you will. Man, about the future space vehicles that we are most excited about. Hopefully, you will also participate in that conversation. So
You better.
stay with us.
It's gonna be a short segment if you don't.
There's some more tomorrow coming right up.
Look into her face, determination in her eyes. She won't give up or quit or fall for little fashion lies. Filled with awesome expectation. This girl's a fascination, and nothing in her way will keep her from her destination. 'Cause she's fire walking, she's fire walking. When it's hot, she keeps on moving. Through the heat, keeps on improving. Yeah, she's fire walking, she's fire walking to be free.
Tomorrow continues, and before we get into our half roundtable discussion, I'd like to thank all of the patrons of Tomorrow who helped to make this specific segment of this episode happen. That's my impersonation of myself. These are the Escape Velocity patrons. They've contributed $10 or more to this specific episode. We also have our Orbital patrons. They're people who've contributed $5 or more to this specific episode. To find out how you can help crowdfund every single one of these shows and help us do cool new things in the future, head on over to patreon.com/TMRO. Also, we're using a new plugin to build those slates. The plugin doesn't look at people who haven't paid yet. So if you sign up, become a patron, but you haven't hit a billing cycle yet, your name won't appear in the show. And we just entered the first billing cycle like yesterday. So it's possible that your name didn't make it in, but it should have. And if that happened, I'm sorry. It should definitely make it in next week's show. So please don't be angry. Hopefully, and I've done feature requests with them. I'm like, hey, it can't be this way. We need to have it. So they've got an updated version of the plugin that'll be coming out soon. All right, we're talking about future space vehicles that we are most excited about. Actually, Cariann, I'm going to start with you because you brought up a vehicle I had totally forgot about. Completely forgot about. All right, go ahead.
Okay, so here's the thing. I am kind of crap with heights.
Yeah, she is. Not a fan.
So you know how for instance, you can go to Chicago and you can visit, I think it was what was previously known as the Sears Tower, and I don't remember what it's called anymore. And they have the cool thing where like the glass actually sort of leans out and you can be too many stories up and you can sort of like look down on the whole city. That kind of stuff makes my palms sweat. Like, that is not going to be a thing in my world. But I very specifically and systematically tried to help myself not necessarily get over the fear per se, but, become more comfortable with the fear so that as my palms sweat, it doesn't have to be so bad. Quite sincerely, my palms are sweating.
Because she knows I'm bringing her to space.
Pretty much.
She knows that this is going to be a thing because she won't let me go alone.
No.
So she's going with me.
And he has to go.
I have to go.
Even if I push him out the window. Anyway, the point is that, the one thing that actually has kind of interested me, besides the Vomit Comet 0G thing, only if Tim Bailey is my assistant though, is the Zero to Infinity, the balloon. Here it is.
I like their logo.
It's so cute. I love it. So the whole deal with this is that it takes about an hour and a half to ascend. You're in the air near space. I think it's 60 kilometers in the air. And then you're...
Stratosphere.
Thank you. And then you are coasting essentially for about 2 hours, and then you have another hour descent phase is what's going on. And and then you can see the little gold areas are actually going to be windows. That's roughly the size that it's going to be. That's kind of a prototypey sort of situation going on. And that's the kind of capsule that you would be in, and you are lofted by a helium balloon, if I remember correctly. And this is what I'm excited about. This is the thing that I think is really cool, and it's not going to be here tomorrow or next year. They are a little ways out yet, but this is the one I think is neat. We most recently were in Vegas a couple of weeks ago to do sort of a pre-Thanksgiving with my family, and they have the like. I don't know what to call it, but it essentially looks like a London Eye, but it's bigger.
Yeah,
And so
call
for
it the
those
Vegas
of you,
Eye.
Sure, it's not called the Vegas Eye. I think it's called the High Roller, which is a dumb name. It's not a Ferris wheel though. It's slightly different than that because you don't actually move or shake or whatever. But these little capsules kind of go all the way around, and you get a really, really tall view. And it's glass. Italian glass is my understanding. In any case, I looked at that and initially was like, ha, no. But the whole rest of the family wanted to go on it, and I said, oh, okay, fine. So we went on this thing, and I actually was like, this is not terrible. It's just slow enough where I don't feel like I'm rising up in the air, if that makes any sense. And so that made me feel like, okay, maybe I could actually do this. Because if it's an hour and a half ascent, that gives you a decent amount of time to kind of like adjust to where you are, where you're going to be. And then I like how it's faster to come down. That freaked me out a little bit. But still, it's something that I thought is something that I could do, and it could be a good stepping point kind of in general, if that makes any sense. So that's the one, beautiful view of the Strip and the Fountains of Bellagio, for sure, Shaky. So that's the one that I'm most excited about, because it's something I feel like I could do. I feel like if they actually are able to make that, to get that done, it's something that I would be interested in doing.
It's a good stepping stone. So one could argue
it's a great stepping stone.
One could argue it doesn't go to space, but you will likely be able to see the curvature of the Earth from up there. And so it's one of those things where, I've been kind of arguing that these weird, like, this is the boundary of space.
Right.
At this stage, I don't think those things matter, because this is something that can get people excited. Especially for someone like you who is afraid of heights, maybe it's a way to help you, to ease you into the idea of going even higher and faster and further.
Because I think the idea of like Virgin Galactic, that scares me. It's not that I wouldn't do it. I would find a way.
Well, you will be doing it.
I would find some Valium or something. I would figure it out. Like, I would, but at the same time, like, that inherently gives me a fight or flight sort of feeling, whereas the balloon is like, all right, I think I could do that. Like, I'm one step closer to that sort of thing. So that's what I'm really excited about.
Allison on YouTube says, send flat earthers up there so they can observe the curvature of the Earth. It won't work. No, it won't work.
I was just thinking that. We need to start a campaign to pay for their tickets.
Nope, don't do it. It's a waste of your money, because there is nothing you can do. It is not about truth or science or understanding. It's about It's more of a religious belief in them.
To be fair, though, the Flat Earth Society tweeted out that they do believe, that because it's been observed, that Mars, however...
I know.
So we could just send all of the Flat Earthers to Mars.
And then observe Earth from...
Yes! I win!
Cariann,
So
have you heard of
we populate Mars, no
Worldview out
problem,
of
with
Tucson,
people who...
Arizona?
Wait, go ahead.
Have you heard of Worldview out of Tucson, Arizona? Because they're doing a similar type of thing like what Zero to Infinity is doing, having a balloon that goes up in the upper stratosphere and has a cabin like this. And I love the way that Zero to Infinity, the Spanish company, has marketed this, because they want to eventually have it be like a really nice suite. And you would just be hanging out the whole time and like have a meal and like have a really nice time.
Yeah, you can
sounds
totally.
great.
Yeah, it's like customizable. They say they're like, we'll give you a butler if you want pillows. It'd be great. I'm like, yes, I want the VIP experience to almost space. Please, thank you.
Yeah, yes, I think that would be a lot of
Right,
fun.
like I don't have to take a physical. Like I can be drinking up there. This sounds fantastic.
And think of how beautiful it will be. And it will be gradual
Yes.
and, oh yeah. It does sound really awesome.
You know, it's 0 to infinity. It's actually the number 2.
Yep.
And that's why on the side of the
Go back to the image
capsule,
really quick if you can.
You can see it has a O and then 2 lines for 2 and then OO, kind of like the infinity
yep.
symbol. So 0 to infinity. It's not 0 or infinity. Yes, I understand.
It's not Ulu.
It's not.
Udu.
I like Ulu because I think that's hilarious, or Uyu. But yes, normally that would be or, but it's not. They're using it more like 2 separate numerals, so 2. It looks cooler that way, honestly. Anyway, so there's that.
Well, let's talk about actual space vehicles that we are.
Okay, no need for the burn on that one, man. Whatever. Cool. Near space, still space. All right.
Hey, no, that's still really cool. That's something I still want to do too.
Round is a shape.
Go ahead, Mike.
Go on.
What do you want? what are you most excited about coming up here?
Oh man, I'm really excited for the commercial crew vehicles that should be coming online next year. You know, like Crew Dragon and CST 100. I mean,
Sure.
This is something that has been coming up for a while. You know, we've been watching the progress towards this for quite a while. And I remember even when the commercial cargo program was first getting started, thinking that would be so cool if they eventually did something like this, and they did. And we've seen the progress of it, and it's all kind of coming to a head. And we're going to be seeing that in the very near future. This isn't something that's 5 years off or 10 years off or decades off. This is going to be happening very soon, and I for one am super excited for it. I'm sure that you guys are as well.
Oh yeah, absolutely. You've got Crew Dragon interior shots up on the screen now. I think there's another. Yeah, they just look cool, right? It looks these vehicles. You said the commercial crew. So there's the Crew Dragon, and then there's also the Starliner, the CST 100. Right there's a shot of that. They just look like modern spaceships. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. And it's not even like like normally I root kind of more for one company than the other, but when it comes to these vehicles, I'm just like, yes, I want to see both of them flying and flying often. I want to see other vehicles flying often too, and I want to see more projects like what made these vehicles come to be. And I'm getting really excited for it. It's going to be. I think that's when a lot of the wider public is going to kind of really take notice and start paying attention more what's going on in the space industry of just like, oh, wait a minute, what? SpaceX, that company that we've heard about from now and then, is actually sending astronauts to the space station? That's crazy. So I'm looking forward to it.
I think the vehicle I'm most excited for, which excuse me, might surprise you, is actually Spaceship Two. And here's why.
Really?
Right. So, which is surprising because it's suborbital, right? It's not sending humans to Mars. It's not sending humans to the moon. But here's what it's doing. First off, it looks cool. How awesome is that shot?
It does look cool.
Right? It looks cool. And if we're going to open up space to everyone, space has to be cool. People have to want to go to space. Otherwise, they're not going to go to space.
I want you to want to go to space.
Exactly. Okay. Again, look how cool that looks. People have to want to go. They have to wake up and want to become engineers. They have to want to live and work in space.
This is really sexy.
And it looks just gorgeous.
Yeah.
So being cool, especially to engineers, might go, it doesn't make sense. No, it is absolutely important. The other thing with Spaceship Two that gets me really excited is that it's available to mere mortals. You have to be a very wealthy mere mortal, but the price difference between Spaceship Two and anything else is so huge. right? Even the commercial crew stuff. It's so expensive as compared to Spaceship Two. Now, there are other options that are coming online that will hopefully drive those prices down, but right now, in the foreseeable future, the things that are coming out that are like being built, like you will be able to do this hopefully very soon, 6 months away. I'm actually very, very excited about Spaceship Two. I think that's going to be really cool. I think it's going to open up space to a whole new group of people, and it's like the first step is kind of the balloon, like going up high. You're not going into space, but you can see the curvature of the Earth. The next step is actually crossing the lines and going into space, experiencing weightlessness, and seeing the curvature of the Earth and floating around and being inspired by that. And then the step after that is living and working kind of in that, kind of like an ISS, maybe a Bigelow module. Go ahead, you have a thought?
Well, I just realized none of us said anything about Blue Origin. Isn't Blue Origin supposed to be?
Yes, actually, you mentioned that, and they're not in the rundown. Now that you say
like,
that,
there's not even a picture here. Like we can't even call to it.
Okay,
I feel really terrible right now.
Okay, hang on.
Right, you do Balloon, and then you do Blue Origin. Like, say you have all of the money in the universe, which I know isn't a thing, so don't worry. But maybe you invented a new Bitcoin. But right, so like kind of you do the vomit comet thing. You go, cool. I'm probably gonna throw up, so maybe I'll just like hold off for a while. Then you do Balloon because that's really cool, then you go on Blue Origin.
Yeah. Well, okay.
Right.
So
Blue,
hang on. Here's what happened with Blue Origin. You're right. We did forget about Blue Origin. That's Blue Origin's fault.
Well, it kind of is. No offense,
Right?
Sorry, guys, but
it is,
really.
Right? Because hey, here, ready? I know approximately how much it's going to cost. It would have cost to go on a Lynx.
Right.
If they were right.
Right.
I know approximately how much it would have cost to go, or will cost to go on Spaceship Two. How much is it going to cost to fly on a Blue Origin rocket?
Well, is that on Prime or is that next day shipping?
Right. Exactly. we just don't have this data yet.
Just their new shoot. Yeah.
I don't know when
just their new Shepard and their suborbital space tourism. Yeah, they haven't said anything about that.
So maybe
how much it's going to cost or anything. So
if it's the same price or less than Spaceship Two, then I'm equally excited about that because it's going to do the same thing. Although those windows look even bigger, but it's going to be an incredible experience.
Yeah.
And so I'm very excited about that. But if it's going to be millions of dollars again, well, you've closed the door on a lot of people.
Right.
And what I'm excited about is opening the space frontier to people and getting, making them woke. I don't know what phrase to use here.
Wow.
But getting them.
I think we're too old to use that phrase. Go on.
I think I am too. I don't think I'm allowed. I think the millennials are all like glaring at me through the screen.
You ain't with it, man. You ain't with it.
But getting there's a passion that I think every human has for space that some people may have lost,
right.
And I think that programs like this will wake up that passion, and that is what will help drive the next iteration of space, right? This is the first step, and then the next step is kind of that cislunar part, and then actually creating living colonies on the moon, and then actually creating something on Mars, and then beyond that, right?
Right.
I feel like there are these obvious milestones that will happen.
Actually, it's funny because Dutta was going through the pictures, but he didn't actually push them to air.
No, we don't have.
No, we
I
don't.
did not put Blue Origin in there.
No, I know, but I mean, there's we have all kinds of things in there. There's Zero to Infinity, there's Crew Dragon, there's Starliner, there's Orion, there's Space Rider, there's Chinese space plane Shenlong, there's Skylon, there's Dream Chaser, there's Spaceship Two, there's BFS or Big Falcon Spaceship, there's Chinese space station.
Are you actually going through these in like real time? Oh my God!
Yeah.
Well done, Dutta. Well done.
No,
He's just smiling.
I knew we could keep up. There's also the Deep Space Gateway. No, you're right. There's a lot. There's just so many. The great thing is that there's so many that we forgot one. Okay. Like, let's be clear on that.
I'm still blaming Blue Origin for forgetting about them. I blame them, not me.
Sure. Sure.
I don't know why that's fair, but somehow it is.
Well, I mean, to a certain extent, you would think that there would be, because I'm on Amazon all the time, you would think that there'd be a little, like, Amazon Easter egg. And I know not every company is great with Easter eggs.
Maybe there is.
But, like,
maybe we just
Tesla,
haven't found it.
You know, you hit a couple different buttons on Tesla, and then you could be driving on Mars. And, like, that's a cool, like, weird little Easter egg that still kind of keeps it on the forefront of people's minds, even if they weren't necessarily intending to think about space in general. I don't see why, April 1st, Amazon can't have
I think almost
pre-order
Blue Origin
flights.
wants it that way. I think they want us to kind of forget about them, so that whenever they do something, everyone's just like, "Oh yeah, Blue Origin! This is so awesome!" They do this
guess, but,
every
like,
time that they
how
did
long
one
does
of their
that
test
last?
flights or something like that.
But you know what I'm saying? And then we all go crazy and gaga. Somebody, I forget exactly who it was, but Bill Gates has a quote that's something along the lines, and I know I am jacking this up, so please forgive me for a second, but it's like when you have certain expectations of what you can get done in a year, you almost always are really upset with yourself because you feel like you should be getting more done in a year than you do. But when you look back, there are things that happen that you were actually surprised by because you weren't even expecting them. And so, yeah, if Blue Origin's taking that kind of philosophy of like, well, if you didn't even see it coming, you couldn't have been disappointed. That's great. But then the euphoria from that only lasts for so long because we go, whoa, that was so cool. I was totally not expecting it. When are you doing the next thing that we have been expecting now for 3 years? You know what I'm saying? Like, it doesn't work that way. It doesn't actually. We don't end up forgiving you for doing something really cool on the side when we've still been expecting this other cool thing for a while, which is the sort of give and take about new space. I think in general, we have said many times it never moves nearly as fast as we want it to. But then at the same time, you look back and go, man, look what we've done in the last 5 years. Like, this is crazy. We've launched and landed rockets from different companies successfully. Like, this is unreal in the last couple of years. In the last 5 years, the things that humanity has done in that amount of time that we weren't necessarily expecting them to do is really, really fantastic. I think that's why they say, that's when you look at the past, it's, what is it, 2020? Past, I can't talk anymore. Apparently I'm done.
Hindsight is 2020.
Thank you. Hindsight is 2020. That was the word I wanted. I'm like, I don't know, forethought, which is not what I wanted in any way, shape, or form. In any case, there you go.
In the chat room, Calliser says, Blue Origin will be everywhere when the time comes. Maybe.
With any luck, man.
Maybe.
Like, all ships rise at the tide. Don't get us wrong. We want all of them to be successful, even the ones we've forgotten about. I think it is really amazing, though, that we managed to forget about a huge player in the new space industry, and because there's just so much going on, which is kind of cool.
The chat room brought up quite a few different things. The first one they brought up was the Big Falcon spaceship. We can't really talk about that at all, but I'll pass that over to Space Mike. Excitement
don't get
over
me wrong.
BFS.
I'm really excited for this. But at the same time, we have Elon's timeline that he's given for this, but I'm at least taking it with a grain of salt. And it's just like, yes, it would be great to see this in just a couple of years, but when it actually comes online, and whether or not it even comes online in this iteration, because let's not forget that just a year prior, this was going to be a much bigger spaceship, and so there could be future redesigns before it actually does start flying. But I do believe, and I have the confidence that this or something like this will be flying from SpaceX eventually, and that they're going to do awesome things and continue on with all these goals. And even though a lot of people think that, or have said that SpaceX, is like kind of has a tunnel vision with trying to get to Mars or something like that, I don't think that that's true, especially with the way that at this most recent presentation of the redesigned Big Falcon spaceship, of that they are willing to do all of the things with it, even some of the things that we, I guess, have kind of criticized with the whole point-to-point transport. We think that that's really cool too, but they're not just. I think they're willing to do all the things, and that willingness to put themselves out for and cover as many different space projects, at least that are involved with human spaceflight, as possible, is great. And there's lots of other things that I want to see too. I mean, we've been working on Orion for a really long time, and once that actually does start flying, I think that even with or without the SLS, we probably will use Orion at least a couple of times. I mean, it's already flown in space once, and we've invested almost as much money into it as we have for the Space Launch System. So that'll be really cool once that starts flying, especially a lot of the projects that NASA and our international partners have planned for what we could do with it, and what we could do with a lot of the other space modules that are coming out in the future. That's something that I'm really excited about, is a lot of the space station modules that are under construction right now. I mean, the Russians have several modules that are, in various phases of completion to get ready for launch. The Chinese are in various phases of construction with all of their different space modules to eventually create their Mir class space station, which the Russians may or may not not contribute some space station modules for and truly make it a successor to the International Space Station. And you guys know, of course, that I'm a huge fan of the Deep Space Gateway, and a lot of the elements for that are, either being built or have been studied extensively, and there's new, study contracts being awarded for this. And I'm really excited to see whatever type of result that this brings, because a lot of our international partners, China and ESA especially, are really excited about this idea. Who am I kidding? The Russians are really excited about this idea too. Everyone wants to cooperate on the Deep Space Gateway or something like it to enable lunar activities. And it seems like the Trump administration wants to go back to the moon too. I would love to see stuff going to the moon. I would love to have the infrastructure in place that if I ever somehow struck gold and became a millionaire or billionaire, that I could pay for some sort of commercial trip to go to low Earth orbit, to go to suborbit. Start off like we were talking about with a high altitude flight or even a Vomit Comet, experiencing weightlessness on those parabolic arc flights, and eventually going to space myself, and eventually going to lunar space or something like that. That's the dream I think that all of us have that are really passionate about this and excited about this. So yeah, I'm excited for all of these vehicles that could enable that future.
There was a comment. I'm going to step backwards one moment to Blue Origin. There was a comment in the chat room from Stand for Liberty, which I think was really great, which is to have a billionaire who just hit 100 billion, Jeff Bezos, on our side, space, is a very good thing. So yeah, I think that sums up that last part of that argument. And then absolutely to everything you just said, Space Mike. And adding on to that, there are so many amazingly cool things happening. Like right now, and we've heard this for a very long time of like all these really great things that are going to happen, and I don't want to harp on Shuttle too much, but now that Shuttle's gone, it has opened up a gateway to allow other companies and other entities to come in and do really cool things. And so, and actually speaking of the Shuttle, there you go. That's actually another one of my favorite vehicles. I am very hard on Shuttle. I think it was an engineering masterpiece, but I also think that it was way too many compromises. One of those things where the government built a space vehicle, not the engineers, right? If you look at what the engineers had designed, it's very different than what actually got produced. However, it was beautiful. It was incredible. And I think that the Dream Chaser kind of has that same beauty and that kind of same inspiration. It's just teenier. It's tinier. But it kind of looks cooler, right? It has a more modern, look and feel to it. And it's kind of that vision of the future. It's that reusable, not refurbishable, but reusable space plane. Right? The whole point of the shuttle was to be rapidly reusable and to drastically lower the cost of going to space. Something like this could help do that. You put this on top of a reusable rocket, right? Not refurbishable, reusable rocket. You got a whole reusable infrastructure going there. This is where I actually disagree with United Launch Alliance on the engine recovery. Right? They did the whole their Vulcan's going to jettison the engines and they're not reusing the rest of it. But that's a whole different conversation.
But this and things like this, though, the Dream Chaser space plane really appeal to us. Even though there might be a slight generational gap between me and you two, the Higginbothams, we're both, I consider, the shuttle generation. And those of us who did grow up with the shuttle around, I think we'll always have that soft spot in our heart for space planes. And looking not just at Dream Chaser, it sucks that they might not have been able to do a lot of the crew, sending up people to the International Space Station, but they are at least going to have 6 missions of sending cargo, and looks like at least 2 other missions of free-flying science experiments, one for the UN and one for the DLR, the German Aerospace, essentially the German NASA. And so I'm excited that things will still happen for them, and that there still is a potential for crewed flights in the future. But all these other space planes too. We haven't even talked about Skylon yet, and what a crazy idea that is, and how that could be a huge game changer.
The chat room was all super excited about Skylon. You want to take Skylon, or shall I?
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, so Skylon is another really great one. That one's a little further out, I think, but the premise being, for those who don't know, it'll have air-breathing engines. It's a single-stage-to-orbit vehicle, which has its pros and cons, but the idea being you don't have to go through staging. You reuse the entire thing. It's basically a space airplane. So it breathes air on the ground, and then when it gets high enough up where air is no longer viable, switches over to liquid oxygen and is it RP1? What's the fuel? Is it liquid hydrogen? It switches over to liquid oxygen and a fuel. And then from there, it continues off into space, and it can bring a massive amount of payload up into space. And you looked at last year's BFR BFS presentation, or this last one from not Guadalajara, from Adelaide, and there was a whole lot of great stuff around sending BFR, BFS around the world as a transit system. Skylon could act as that. Skylon could give us the ability to do some really cool things with transit and going to and from different places throughout the world. So I'm really excited for Skylon as well. I think that's going to be really quite awesome.
Mike is so excited for Skylon. He's
turned
into
Skylon. Yeah, absolutely. Are there any others that you're excited about?
I think that pretty much sums that up for the most part. It's not that I'm not excited about these other things. I am much like Mike was saying. I am just as excited about anything that gets more humans into space, even if it's just to see the curvature of the Earth. But if it gets humans into cislunar space, Mars, orbiting, anything along those lines, even what am I trying to say? The hotel around Bigelow Aerospace, anything along those lines, yeah, I am very much so excited for. But if I had to pick one, I am a little bit biased. I like Zero to Infinity.
There's actually a pretty cool comment, kind of along those same lines, from Ferdinand, which is the Elon's interplanetary transport system. Presentation at the International Aeronautical Congress in 2016 made me so passionate about space that I was able to finish my bachelor's on space engineering and have now come to become a project manager. SpaceX and Elon got something nobody else has. It feels like they are building the future. And, I obviously agree. I can't comment too much on SpaceX, but I totally agree with that. But I think that there's going to be some other stuff from some other companies when you can show that you're doing things. It feels like that might be SpaceX's secret sauce, is show people that you're doing things and pushing humanity forward. When we start to see these from other space companies, I think we're going to see a lot more inspiration coming out inside of this field. And I'm really excited to see what happens there. All right, I think we should go to break here really quick. Any final comments from you, Space Mike?
Something that I do to kind of touch on what you were just saying. I used to get really excited anytime there was a new startup or a new space company or something, and now I kind of feel like what you were just saying. Like once I actually see something, especially if it is from a new company that I hadn't previously heard of, then I'm just like, oh, okay, they're actually doing something, and they're actually working towards this, and this is something that could actually happen. So. A lot of the things that we are really excited about, we sometimes have to kind of have that, keep ourselves grounded in reality as to whether or not something is actually going to happen or not. And to be honest, I was a really big fan of Spaceship 2 for a really long time, but I have my own doubts about that, and we've talked until we're blue in the face about to why and everything like that.
Space
so,
Mike, dollar bet
really
they will fly at least once.
Who?
Spaceship 2, dollar bet they will fly at least once. I'm starting my they will fly at least once bets with everyone. Are you saying you don't think Spaceship 2 will fly?
Well,
we humans, passengers, paying passengers.
Paying passengers, I hope so. I don't know. It's I keep going back and forth as to whether or not I think that they will actually launch. And, they've switched engines so many times, and things seem to be going well now in that department, but I haven't really seen a whole lot of information either as to whether or not whatever they're working on now is working and is going to be the final version, or if they're still at that point that, are they still at that point whether they have an engine that is going to work for not, and they're going to have to start from scratch? Like they've had to do that a couple of times. So I just don't know. There's lots of different things that makes me just wonder, I guess, about Virgin Galactic. So we'll see what happens.
That design is so 2004.
So here's the thing. I think it's all of these companies are a lot more than just engineering. It's also the people, and we know a lot of the people that work at Virgin Galactic, and they are very good people. And I don't see these as the type of people that will ever give up. I mean, they live. Blood is in their space is in their blood. There we go. And that's the correct order.
K McCoy in the chat room too pretty much sums up my feelings really well, especially about Virgin Galactic. Space Mike is too much of an optimist to actually bet against them, even if he believes it.
Being
and you're
an
absolutely right. I want them to succeed.
Being an optimist, there's nothing wrong with that. There's so much pessimism out there. Go for it. I have little doubt. Very little doubt that they will actually succeed. And actually, same thing with a good chunk of these. I don't believe 100% of these will succeed, but I think a good chunk of them will actually get off the ground and do something.
A lot of these look more and more realistic. I don't mean that they look realistic. Like it seems like they're actually going to happen in reality, and that's what is so exciting. Especially what you brought up earlier, Cariann, about how looking back and seeing what we actually did accomplish. We might not have done a lot of the big dreams that we wanted to see happen or that we were rooting for the most, but the things that have happened have been phenomenal. So whatever does happen in the future is going to be something really awesome. It's something really epic. It might not be exactly what we expect, but it's still going to be really cool.
All right. I think that sums everything up. I want to know what you guys think. What is the favorite vehicle? We may have covered it. Maybe we didn't. Maybe there's another vehicle we forgot.
I'm sure there's something
What
we
a
missed.
great time we live in when there are so many future vehicles that we are forgetting them. How amazing is that? So, what did we forget? A, but B, what are you excited about and why? Right? Like, what excites you about some program in the future? Now, I clarified this whole thing as vehicle. We all generally chose like spaceships. But it could be any space. Vulcan could be is a vehicle, right? It could be Vulcan. It could be something on the Chinese space program, or something, the Vega launcher, or pick one. Pick one. Anything that's moderately realistic. What, you got one?
Well, because Digoose, 1984, off of YouTube says the Tesla Roadster.
Yeah. Anyhow, leave your comments in the chat room, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, wherever you want. Speaking of comments, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, comments from our last show. So stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Look into her face, determination in her eyes. She won't give up or quit or fumble little fashion lines. Filled with awesome expectation. This girl's a fascination. And nothing in her way will keep her from her destination. 'Cause she's fire walking. She's fire walking. When it's hot, she keeps on moving. Through the heat, keeps on improving. Yeah, she's fire walking. She's fire walking to be free.
And more tomorrow. Before we get into comments from our last show, a shout out to our patrons of tomorrow. These are people who've contributed $10 or more to this episode. We also have our orbital patrons who have contributed $5 or more to this episode, and our suborbital patrons. These are people who've contributed $2.50 or more to this episode. To find out how you can help crowdfund the shows of tomorrow and keep us going year after year, show after show, head on over to patreon.com/TMRO. It's because of you they're able to hit, what is this, show 44 this year?
Yep.
44
The 10th season. Oh.
of Orbit 10. That's incredible, and that's because of people like everyone on those lists who helped to make this happen. We absolutely could not do this without you. So thank you. And if you get something out of this show, please consider helping contribute to the show. You know, every single penny helps. And even if you can't afford to do it, which that's fine, there's nothing wrong with that. You know, we could always use help, like just promoting the show. Just, you know, post it on your Twitter feed. You know,
As we almost didn't tweet today.
I don't think we did. You know, just if you know someone who would be excited about the show, just loop them in. There you go. All right. Let's get started with comments from last week's show. Capcom, take us away.
So I apologize, I did not put a graphic in the rundown to talk about what the last show was, but Orbit 10.34 was talking about NASA's role, or what we think NASA's role could/should be, around 2030 or so.
/10.43.
What did I say, 34?
Yep.
43. Apparently I'm dyslexic today, so
one of
it's
those
fine.
shows. By the way, it's December, so these shows are going steadily downhill.
Sad.
Well, hang on.
But true, but sad.
I think it's the internet's favorite kind of shows too.
Yes.
So you know,
We'll probably be drinking on air towards the end of the year.
Summer bar update later.
All right. So the first comment about that show comes off of YouTube from Untied Music Studio.
Hi, Vax.
Hi, Vax. Says NASA has a part of
NASA has as a part of their core charter to foster commercial development. If NASA is designing and building rockets, then they are directly competing with companies who are also designing and building rockets. For instance, NASA doesn't fly their weightless wonder zero-G aircraft because it competes with the Zero-G Corporation.
Commas, man, commas.
Thank you, Ben. I appreciate that.
I got you.
I was just reading the words that were on the screen. That's all I've got.
I'm Ron Burgundy.
That's exactly. Thank you. That's why I was having trouble. Yeah. So I mean,
With that.
I mean, go ahead, Mike. Go ahead.
As far as the whole rocketry conversation, I mean, yes, that's true. And aside from SpaceX and Blue Origin working on their kind of heavy lift rockets, there's no one else really doing the heavy lift, at least in the United States. So I don't necessarily have a problem with NASA working on, the Space Launch System for a heavy lift rocket. But if they started delving into, the medium or even smaller class rockets, I would have a big problem with that. That would be competition. And, why design and develop a new rocket, especially if it takes billions of dollars for NASA to do any sort of project like that,
right,
when we see all these commercial companies doing it for way, way, way cheaper, especially the ones that already have rockets online. So,
yeah.
So they're not necessarily competing right now. That might be where I disagree, in the sense that they're the only ones really working on heavy lift right now, even though SpaceX is, they are, but BFR is not ready yet. So
Blue Origin. We have no idea how far along Blue Origin is. Let's be frank, we have no idea where Blue Origin is.
They're in Washington.
Yeah. Aside from testing their engines.
All right, I'll give it to you.
Thank you.
But Vex is right. They shouldn't compete.
I agree. I think we all agree with Vax's comment.
Yeah.
And we covered that earlier, right? NASA should be doing the things that are just way out there. They've got the engineering minds behind it. They've got the budget for it. They should be pushing humanity forward, not doing what humanity has already done since the 60s. Anyhow.
Yeah, that's fine.
All right, next up.
All right. Next up also comes off of YouTube from a Rich Marceau.
Sure.
What was I going to say? The astronaut training school is an interesting idea, but I'm still not sure the volume is there to support anything analogous, I'm really bad with that word, to an accredited university like West Point or the Air Force Academy. Deke Slayton has been approached had been approached with that idea in the 1960s and shot it down. I'm still not sure the volume is there to support such.
There's also the astronaut, what is it called?
Astronauts for Hire?
Astronauts for Hire, right? Yeah. And that business.
Although they changed their names recently,
Sure,
didn't
neat. It doesn't make sense to me, actually. I kind of agree.
There was a couple of companies and startups that had the whole astronaut training thing, but they were more, even Astronauts for Hire were more kind of geared for the suborbital tourism space market that was supposed to have materialized 5 years ago. So at least for those companies, that was seemed like a lot more of their focus. And then there was a couple that were even kind of partnered with the whole space adventures thing for people that wanted to do Soyuz. But Russia and Roscosmos were handling all the astronaut training for that, the actual astronaut training for that. So
I think it's the wrong direction.
I agree with Rich that there isn't enough volume yet to really support converting over like NASA Johnson or something like that to be a commercial astronaut training center. But eventually, the hope is anyway that there will be. And then once it gets to that point, that's when that idea makes sense. It doesn't make sense right now, but
it will never make sense
someday.
No, look, it does not ever make sense. How much training do you take to get on an airplane?
Well, wait, how much training do I take or how much training should I have?
All right, that's fair. But really, right, if you're going to be a passenger in one of these things, there should be zero training required. You should just be able to be a passenger. This is a mode of transportation. That's what this is at its core. It will enable new markets and it will allow you to do cool new things in space. And those cool new things in space, yeah, you're going to need training on. But I don't really view that as astronaut training. That's just space-based plumber training. That's just an extension of whatever, right? There's an extension of what we're already doing in those specialized fields, just adapted for space. I can see training in those areas, but astronaut training, like training to become an astronaut, I think that will become a thing of the past over time. It just does not make sense to me, with the exception of, again, specialized fields. But I don't think it's going to be it's just going to be tied into those existing fields.
I like how JC Warp says, every flight I've ever taken included training.
Okay, okay, fair. That's fair. How to fasten the seatbelt, how to unfasten the seatbelt. Here's
Because
where
at
your
this
life
point,
vest is.
seriously,
Fine.
who doesn't know how to do that? Not to mention that you shouldn't need training on that. You should be wearing seatbelts in your cars. Why are we going over this?
All right, that's fine, sure. So then that's the same amount of training you should receive on your rocket flight.
Yeah.
Yep, there will
Yeah.
be there will be a little video of people dancing and singing songs of like, in a case of emergency decompression, your flight suit is located, whatever. I hope it's going to be better than that.
I hope it is too. R.I.P. Virgin Airlines.
Oh, they did have the best Virgin
Like
America.
the Virgin America.
Yeah, only Virgin America got bought by.
Sorry.
Yeah, the rest of the Virgin ones are fine. It was the best. Anyhow, yeah.
The best?
No, it was the second best. The British Airways one is pretty good.
British Airways is. Yeah, that's true.
All right, anyhow, next up.
Okay, anyway, sorry. Next comment comes off of Facebook from a Thomas.
This is a non-smoking launch.
Thomas Muscarella says, I could see NASA become the FAA for space launch systems. However, NASA needs to stay in the space sciences. I agree. I think I really just threw that one out as an option just to kind of see what everybody else's reaction was going to be. Because sometimes I like to play devil's advocate, so there's that.
There's kind of this thing. So I think, I keep bringing up the FAA of space, and I think the community is going to kind of miffed at me like, no, that's not what NASA's for. And I think I sort of agree. That is not what NASA's for. We will need an FAA of space and just to kind of maintain space traffic. And a lot of people are like saying, well, that's what the FAA does.
I will point out very quickly that there was at least one commenter who said, the FAA is the FAA of space.
They are not.
So I was like, sure, because, they take care of the...
Yeah, they don't. Like if we've got multiple
They take care of what leaves from here and goes into space. They're not necessarily regulating what's in space.
Right.
Yeah, that's the problem.
That's the problem.
So right now, today, we don't need that regulation, right? So, but when we're talking about, remember the last show we did was
Right.
talking about NASA 2030 and beyond, in hopes that by that time, we've got cislunar activities actually happening in between Earth and Moon, right? Constant activities. We're building space stations. We're putting colonies on the Moon. This means constant, possibly daily, imagine that, daily launches to cislunar space and to the Moon. So you're going to have crossing spacecraft to and from the Moon. You need to maintain that. There needs to be some semblance of order up there. Someone just watching out and making sure that two spacecraft don't slam into each other. FAA does not do that. That is not a thing that the FAA does today. Now, there are organizations that kind of track space, space objects and telemetry and whatnot, but there really isn't an organization designed to just that. We don't need that today.
Right.
But again, when we're talking 2030 and beyond, maybe 2050, timelines are sketchy, we're going to probably need something like that. Maybe it's not NASA, right? So maybe that goes to the FSA. I don't know.
It should be the UN.
Sure. Pick an entity. I think we've all kind of sort of agreed that NASA should be doing those really hard things that are otherwise not going to be picked up by private industry.
Planetary science, more advanced probes, more advanced science.
Those all make sense.
That.
You look at basically NASA should be a much larger JPL, right? JPL is the diamond in the rough at NASA. Not that the other areas are bad, but JPL is just magnificent, and so you just take that and make it bigger and better. All right, anyhow, that's fine.
Great. Next comment comes off of tomorrow.tv from a...
Neat. How neat was that? Ben got to rent some more.
Well, because I have nothing work appropriate to say to that. So John Eric Thompson says, the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, NACA, was a U.S. federal agency founded on March 3rd, 1915, to undertake, promote, and institutionalize aeronautical research. That was us talking about how NACA transformed into NASA, National Aeronautical and Space Administration. No, agency. Thank you. Wow.
And the idea how their goal is to do the same thing, to essentially the idea of commercializing space. That is kind of their goal, was to first study, figure it out, and eventually push it forward to the commercial world. So.
I mean, I guess in that sort of mind frame, does that mean that NASA has simultaneously completed that and failed at that?
I think we're still in transition, at least in my opinion.
Yeah.
But because, NASA from the beginning wasn't necessarily building a lot of stuff. They were still contracting everyone to build all of the Redstone, Jupiter, and
Right.
Saturn rockets. And NASA owned all that stuff now, though, at the time. So we're seeing that transition now of NASA still kind of, they're still contracting out for all of their stuff, at least as far as, rockets and some of their spacecraft and stuff like that. But now the companies that are designing that stuff can own at least the IP to that and market and use it themselves if they choose to. So that's something that I like to see, and that's kind of the transition that I see, using the NACA model and how they figured out a lot of aeronautic research, and the contractors that NACA contracted out to build some of the experimental test planes. They profited from that and became the companies that eventually are the big airlines that we know today. So I see that thing. I see us being in that early infancy, like in the 1920s with the space industry, and things kind of being passed over from the government research to the commercial entities and doing the different interesting things that they want to do. But at the same time, like, NASA still is the best at what they do, especially like we keep on saying when it comes to, the planetary research and the really far out there science. So, we're in that transition, though, in my opinion.
Yeah. Ben, anything else to add?
No, I think that, Mike, you summed that up extremely well. And actually,
I was like, oh, yeah, what he said.
Yeah, even Destructor in the chat room was like, yes, Mike, the commercial world is not viable, blah, 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 blah. So, yeah, no, I think everyone's basically in agreement. So, I think we're going to end the show right there. I think that was a really great show.
Right.
And we've got, I believe, 2 more shows this year. Is that correct? Only 2 more in December. And then that's it. Then we're off for the rest of the year. And we'll come back with Orbit 11. Now, before we go into After Dark, I wanted to give a shout out to the ground support patrons. These are people who've contributed between 1 penny and $2.49. I'm sorry, it's between $1 and $2.49. And to find out how you can get your name in the show, all the different rewards that you get for each different level, and how you can help support us, head on over to patreon.com/TMRO. I'd like to thank everyone so much for watching. See you next week.